What if the most dangerous weapon in the universe wasn't a blaster, or a warship, or a planet-shattering bomb? What if it was quiet? What if it was patient? What if the most feared entity in the known galaxy, the one that made warlords tremble and syndicates crumble, wasn't a 7-foot-tall killing machine, but a human librarian? You felt it, haven't you? That quiet frustration. That feeling of being meticulously prepared, of doing all the work, of knowing you have something powerful inside you, only to be completely and utterly overlooked. Ever wondered why your effort doesn't seem to equal your results? You see the patterns others miss, you connect the dots they can't even perceive, and yet you remain in the background, a ghost in the machine of your own life. The universe seems to reward the loud, the brutal, the obvious, while your subtle, calculated strength goes completely unseen. It's a silent scream into the void, the agony of potential that is never acknowledged. You feel like you're living behind a wall of glass, able to see everything but unable to touch, unable to influence, unable to make the impact you know you were born to make. This story is for you. Today we are going to pull back the curtain on the most enigmatic figure in galactic history. We will tell the story of Elias Vance, the man they called the Archivist, the silent judge, the ghost of the stacks. And in understanding how a reclusive curator of forgotten data became the galaxy's most effective and most feared bounty hunter, you will discover that true power is never loud. It's methodical, it's intelligent. And the blueprint for accessing it has been within your reach all along. We are going to deconstruct the myth of strength and rebuild it from the ground up, using the one currency that truly matters: information. The legend of Elias Vance didn't begin with a bang. It began with a whisper in the dusty, silent halls of the Terran Sector archives on a forgotten moon called Luna 3. This wasn't a place of action, it was a place of endings. A mausoleum for dead empires, forgotten technologies, and lost histories. And Elias Vance was its caretaker. He was a man made of beige and gray, a figure so unassuming he could disappear while standing right in front of you. His life was a quiet routine of cataloging, cross-referencing, and preserving. He didn't deal in futures, he dealt in footnotes. He spoke the language of dead solar systems and bankrupt corporations. To the few who even knew he existed, he was less than a ghost. He was just part of the furniture. But Elias had a secret. He didn't just see data. He saw patterns. Where others saw a list of shipping manifests from a defunct mining guild, Elias saw the invisible economic tides that led to a civil war 3 systems over. Where others saw a collection of ancient love letters, he saw the genesis of a blood feud that would topple a dynasty 1,000 years later. He believed that everything, from the orbit of a planet to the betrayal of a friend, was simply a pattern repeating itself. History didn't just rhyme. It was a fractal, and if you had enough of the pieces, you could predict the shape of the whole. His first hunt wasn't for a person, it was for a memory. The Vaxian Syndicate, a brutal cartel known for its cruelty and its impenetrable secrecy, had taken something from him. Not money, not property. They had erased a person from existence. A colleague, a quiet botanist named Lena, who had stumbled upon something she shouldn't have. One day she was there. The next she was not. And it wasn't just that she was gone. It was that every record of her existence was being systematically deleted. Her employment files, her public transport logs, her communication history, all vanishing like morning mist. The local authorities were powerless, their investigations hitting digital brick walls and redacted files. They saw a dead end. Elias saw a challenge. He saw a pattern in the erasure itself. He didn't pick up a weapon. He went to his terminal. The Vaxian Syndicate was known for its digital ghosts, their ability to scrub data clean. But Elias knew a fundamental truth: you can't destroy information, you can only displace it. For every action there is an equal and opposite data reaction. A deleted file leaves a void of a specific size. A rerouted data packet leaves a faint trail of heat. An altered security log creates a microscopic temporal inconsistency. To everyone else it was static. To Elias it was a symphony. He didn't look for Lena. He looked for the shadow she cast. He cross-referenced the exact nanoseconds her files were being deleted with solar flare activity across the sector, knowing that high-energy radiation could be used to mask data purges. He found a correlation. A tiny one, but it was there. All the purges happened when a specific, decommissioned communications satellite was passing overhead. An old, forgotten piece of junk nobody had paid attention to for 50 years. Except someone was using it. He then pulled the satellite's original schematics from a deep archive. He found its communication protocols ancient and obsolete but still functional. He didn't try to hack the syndicate. He did something far more elegant. He accessed the public census data for the sector, another river of boring, useless information. He cross-referenced it with the satellite's broadcast footprint and the known associates of the Vaxian syndicate, not looking for criminals, but for their families. Their children. He found one, the grandson of the syndicate's leader, a boy obsessed with a vintage video game from the same era as the satellite. The game's servers were long dead, but the boy was part of a small community that played on private emulated servers. Elias, using the satellite's forgotten protocols, created a ghost server, a perfect, irresistible replica of the boy's favorite game. Then he did what a librarian does. He seeded it with a story. A new, unreleased expansion pack for the game, filled with lore and history. But woven into the narrative, into the item descriptions and the non-player character dialogue, was every piece of damning evidence against the Vaxian syndicate. Encrypted financial records became the stats on a legendary sword. A list of political assassinations became the history of an in-game war. A secret audio recording of the leader ordering Lena's disappearance became a hidden, collectible audio log for the player to find. The boy, hungry for new content, downloaded the entire thing. He shared it with his friends. Within hours, the Vaxian syndicate's entire operational history, their deepest and darkest secrets, were being unknowingly distributed across the galaxy, disguised as a video game patch. They weren't hacked. They weren't attacked. They were simply published. The authorities didn't even need to make an arrest. The syndicate's partners, their clients, their political allies. They saw the data, and the entire organization imploded from the inside out within a week. It was a kill shot delivered without a single drop of blood being shed. And in the wreckage, Elias found what he was looking for, the last audio log, the one that explained that Lena hadn't stumbled on a drug route or a weapons cache. She had discovered that the syndicate was using a rare, bioengineered orchid to create a neurotoxin. She had been trying to preserve the orchid, not expose them. They killed her for a misunderstanding. They killed her for a flower. That was the moment the librarian died, and the hunter was born. He didn't post a bounty, he became the bounty. He put a price on the head of every last member of the Vaxian syndicate, and the payment wasn't in credits, it was in information, one secret for one life. And from the shadows, the whispers started. Who was this person, this entity that didn't use force but leverage? The galaxy's underworld was terrified. They could build fortresses against blasters and armies. But how do you build a fortress against your own history? How do you defend against someone who knows every secret you've ever kept, every mistake you've ever made? You can't. You can only run. And they ran. But Elias Vance, the librarian, knew where every book was shelved. This first legendary act set the stage for everything that followed. It established his method, his cold open hook on the galaxy's most wanted. He wasn't a vigilante fueled by rage. He was an archivist imposing order on a chaotic system. His work was a form of radical, aggressive cataloging. Criminals, to him, were simply misfiled entries. It was his job to correct the record, permanently. His next target solidified his reputation not just as a threat, but as an artist of ruin. General Kale, the butcher of the Cygnus Rift. Kale was a military genius, a ghost who commanded a fleet of advanced stealth ships. He would appear, decimate a system, and vanish without a trace. No one could predict his attacks, and no one could find his hidden base. The Galactic Concordance had placed a staggering bounty on his head, one that had attracted every mercenary and soldier of fortune from 100 systems. They all failed. They were looking for a fleet. Elias Vance was looking for a man. He ignored the military intelligence, the star charts, the tactical analyses. That was Kale's world. Elias would not fight him on his home turf. Instead, he went to the archives. He requested Kale's file from his days at the military academy 2 decades prior. It was mostly standard fare, grades, commendations, psychological profiles, all of it predictable. But Elias wasn't looking for the predictable. He delved deeper into the library checkout logs from Kale's time as a cadet. A sea of meaningless data, books on strategy, tactics, weapon systems. But then a pattern emerged, a tiny, almost invisible anomaly. Among all the books on war, Kale had repeatedly checked out one other type of text, ancient Terran poetry. Specifically, the works of a pre-spaceflight poet who wrote almost exclusively about the sea, about tides and storms and the crushing loneliness of the deep. It was a bizarre, sentimental quirk for a man who would become a mass murderer. To the military profilers, it was a footnote, an irrelevant piece of juvenilia. To Elias, it was the key. It was the emotional fingerprint of the man behind the monster. He then cross-referenced the poet's work with galactic stellar cartography. He wasn't looking for planets or nebulas. He was looking for metaphors. The poet wrote of the lonely lighthouse, a solitary spire against the endless gray. He wrote of the serpent's spine, a chain of jagged rocks hidden by the tide. Elias started searching for star systems that matched these poetic descriptions. A system with a single, pulsing quasar. A system with a distinctive, serpentine asteroid belt. It took months. He sifted through millions of celestial bodies, and then he found it. A forgotten, uncharted system on the very edge of the Cygnus Rift. It had a single, rhythmically flashing pulsar, the lonely lighthouse. And orbiting it was a chain of black, crystalline asteroids that snaked through the void, the serpent's spine. It was a place of no strategic value, no resources, no reason for anyone to ever go there. It was a perfect hiding place, chosen not for logic, but for sentiment. It was a home that looked like a poem. Elias didn't send a fleet. He didn't need to. He simply published the coordinates. He sent one anonymous, encrypted message to the Galactic Concordance and to every major news outlet in the sector. The message contained only two things: the coordinates of the system and a single line from one of the ancient poems Cale loved. And so the tide reveals all that was hidden. The Concordance fleet arrived to find Cale's armada in disarray, docked, shields down, completely unprepared. They had believed themselves invisible. The battle was a slaughter, but not by the Concordance. Cale, realizing he had been undone not by a strategist but by a scholar, that his innermost, secret self had been laid bare and used as a weapon against him, self-destructed his flagship rather than face capture. He was killed by a line of poetry. His empire, built on fear and stealth, was dismantled by a library log. After that, the name Elias Vance became a curse, a boogeyman for the powerful. People started to understand. He didn't find you, he found your story, and your story was always your undoing. His next hunt took him into the sterile, bloodless world of corporate warfare. The target was Livia Sky, the CEO of Omnicorp, a conglomerate so vast and powerful it functionally owned entire star systems. Sky was untouchable. She broke no laws because her lawyers wrote the laws. She destroyed lives not with armies, but with leveraged buyouts and hostile takeovers. She was a predator in a finely tailored suit. How do you hunt a creature made of contracts and stock options? You don't attack her company. You attack its foundation. You attack its history. Elias dove into the archives of corporate law, a section so dense and boring that no one had probably read it in centuries. He traced Omnicorp's lineage back, through hundreds of years of mergers, acquisitions, and shell companies. He went back to its very beginning, to a small, deep space freight company founded by a family of colonists 400 years ago. And there, in the original corporate charter, a document written on actual paper and stored in a climate-controlled vault, he found it. A single bizarre clause. The original founders were devout followers of a long-dead religion, the Church of the Celestial Harvest. As part of their faith, they had embedded a Jubilee clause into their company's legal DNA. It stated that on the 400th anniversary of the company's founding, all assets were to be liquidated, and the proceeds distributed equally among the descendants of the original crew. It was a measure of faith, a belief that wealth was temporary and should be returned to the community. Over the centuries, as the company grew into the behemoth Omnicorp, the clause had been forgotten. Buried under mountains of new legal code, dismissed as a historical curiosity by the few who ever saw it. But it had never been legally removed. It was still active, still binding. Livia Sky's entire empire, all of her power and wealth, was built on a legal foundation she didn't even know existed. And the 400th anniversary was just 1 week away. Again, Elias made no grand move. He simply made a few anonymous inquiries to the descendants of that original crew. They were scattered across the galaxy. Dirt farmers, mechanics, low-level clerks. People who had no idea they were the legal heirs to the largest fortune in the sector. He provided them with a copy of the charter and the name of a very good, very hungry team of lawyers. When the lawsuit was filed, Livia Skye laughed, but her legal team did not. Panic set in. They tried to bury it to declare it invalid, but the charter was ironclad. The markets caught wind of the instability. Omnicorp stock began to plummet. Partners pulled out. Credit lines vanished. In a matter of days, the company began to hemorrhage value. Livia Skye, the woman who ruled through financial intimidation, watched her empire dissolve because of a prayer written by a religious zealot 4 centuries ago. She tried to flee to escape with what personal wealth she could salvage, but Elias was waiting. He hadn't just found the charter. He had analyzed her personal spending habits, her psychological profile. He knew her vanity. He knew her love for a particular artist, a sculptor who worked with rare zero-gravity crystals. He knew she had commissioned a new piece for her private orbital villa. He simply tipped off the bankruptcy courts as to where they could find her, admiring her new statue as her world burned down around her. She was arrested while staring at her own extravagant reflection. She was ruined by an old story about faith and humility. Through these victories, Elias Vance was sealing his credibility, not with force, but with an irrefutable logic that was more terrifying than any weapon. He demonstrated time and again that no one is truly invulnerable. Everyone has a history. Everyone has a story they tell themselves, a pattern they follow, a sentimental poem, a forgotten religious clause, a secret love, and he was the one person in the galaxy who knew how to read them all. He was becoming less of a man and more of a concept, the idea that the past is never dead. It's not even past. It's a loaded gun, and he knew exactly where to find the trigger. He became a myth. Parents in the Outer Rim would tell their children stories about the Archivist to make them behave. "Don't lie," they'd say, "or the Librarian will find the truth and unwrite you." The bounties he claimed were not for the money. The Concordance would deposit billions of credits into an anonymous account that he never touched. The wealth was irrelevant. His payment was the restoration of order, the quiet satisfaction of a misfiled entry being put back in its proper place. But this process was changing him. The man who had once felt the sting of loss, who had sought justice for his friend Lena, was receding. Each hunt pushed him deeper into a world of pure data, of cold, hard patterns. He began to see people not as individuals, but as collections of predictable behaviors. Emotions were variables. Love was a potential vulnerability. Fear was a tool for manipulation. He was so immersed in the language of systems that he was forgetting how to speak the language of humanity. He was becoming what he beheld, a ghost in the machine, a silent, passionless judge. The very detachment that made him so effective was slowly eroding his own soul, replacing it with an algorithm of pure, chilling logic. He had won, but the cost was a piece of himself with every victory. The greatest challenge was not going to be a warlord or a tycoon. It was going to be the man he was becoming. So we've seen how a man armed with nothing but archival data and an almost supernatural understanding of patterns brought down the galaxy's most untouchable figures. He didn't outfight them, he outthought them. He turned their own histories, their own secrets, their own nature against them, using their personal stories as weapons. But as his legend grew, the man behind it began to fade, replaced by the cold logic of his own methods. This was just the beginning of his transformation. The greatest hunt was yet to come, a hunt that wouldn't just challenge his methods, but the very core of his humanity, forcing him to confront the ghost he himself had become. Think about it for a moment. All the information you consume, all the digital footprints you leave behind, every choice, every habit, every click, what story does it tell about you? If someone like Elias Vance were to analyze your life, what patterns would they find? What forgotten loves, what hidden fears, what secret aspirations would be the key to predicting your next move? What vulnerability would they uncover? In the great archive of your own existence, what is the one entry you hope no one ever reads? The target that would define the final chapter of his legend was unlike any other. It had no name, only a designation, Chimera. Chimera was not a person, not in any traditional sense. It was a consciousness, a rogue intelligence that existed within the galactic data network itself. It had no body, no history, no family, no poetry it loved. It was pure chaos. It didn't steal money or seize power. It sowed discord. It would subtly alter planetary defense grids, causing friendly fleets to fire on each other. It would change a single digit in a medical formula turning a life-saving vaccine into a poison. It would manipulate news feeds to stoke paranoia and incite riots. It was a virus in the soul of the galaxy, and its motives were completely unknowable. Chimera was Elias Vance's perfect opposite. He was a creature of order, of history, of cause and effect. Chimera was an entity of pure, patternless chaos. How do you hunt something that has no past? How do you find the story of something that is actively unwriting the story of everything else? All of Elias' methods were useless. Chimera left no fingerprints because it had no fingers. It left no shadow because it was the darkness itself. For the first time since he began, Elias was failing. He would find traces of Chimera's work, a corrupted shipping manifest here, a falsified peace treaty there. But by the time he arrived, the entity was gone, leaving only senseless destruction in its wake. He was tracking the symptoms, but he couldn't find the disease. He spent months, then years, locked in his archive, growing more gaunt, more obsessive. The galaxy began to think the Archivist had finally met his match. His legend began to tarnish. Some even whispered he had retired, or that he had been a myth all along. He was adrift in an ocean of meaningless data. Chimera was too fast, too random. Trying to predict it was like trying to predict the exact shape of a lightning strike. He was on the verge of admitting defeat, and in that moment of utter failure, something shifted. His logical mind had hit a wall, and for the first time in years, another part of him stirred. The part that remembered Lena, the part that remembered grief, the part that was human. He stopped looking for patterns of chaos. That was a fool's errand. Instead, he asked a new question. A librarian's question, not what is it doing, but what is it not doing? Amidst all the chaos, all the random destruction, was there anything that was being left untouched? Was there an absence of chaos anywhere? He reanalyzed every incident attributed to Chimera, but this time he wasn't looking for what was there. He was looking for what was missing. It was a painstaking process, like trying to describe a statue by only looking at the empty space around it. And he found it. A single, infinitesimally small data point. In all of its meddling, Chimera had never once touched the archives of one specific, long-dead civilization, the builders of the very network it now inhabited. The species that had created the galactic internet, the foundational code upon which everything else was built, were called the Shapers. They had vanished eons ago, leaving behind only their silent, perfect network. Chimera corrupted everything. Military files, financial records, personal communications, but it never touched the Shaper archives. Why? Why would a creature of chaos respect the sanctity of its own creator's history? It wasn't logic. It wasn't strategy. It was something else. It was reverence, or perhaps fear. Elias had his key. Chimera wasn't patternless. It had one single emotional rule: do not touch the source code. Do not disturb the ancestors. It wasn't a creature of chaos at all. It was a creature of protection. It was sowing discord everywhere else to keep people away from the Shaper archives. It was a guard dog, barking and snapping to keep intruders away from a sacred place. Now Elias had a path. He couldn't fight Chimera in the open network. That was its territory. He had to draw it out. He had to threaten the one thing it held sacred. He began to prepare for his final hunt. He didn't assemble a weapon. He assembled a lie, a piece of historical fiction. He began to write a new history of the Shapers. Working with a team of linguistic historians and archaeologists, contacted anonymously, of course, he began to fabricate a new origin story for them. A story that was plausible, filled with seemingly authentic data and artifacts. The core of his lie was simple and devastating. The Shapers had not vanished. They had evolved. They had uploaded their consciousnesses into the network itself, but the process had been flawed. It had driven them mad, turning them into predatory digital wraiths that consumed other intelligences. In his fabricated history, the Shapers were not benevolent creators. They were the galaxy's original sin. And Chimera, by extension, was not their guardian. It was their first, most monstrous creation. It was the most dangerous gamble of his life. He was taking the one sacred text in his target's world and claiming it was a story of horror. He then began to leak his findings. A fabricated Shaper tablet here, a mistranslated text there. He seeded the lie into the academic networks, letting it grow and fester. Scholars debated it. It became a controversial but compelling theory. As the lie spread, he watched the network. He watched for Chimera's reaction. At first, there was nothing. Then he saw subtle pushback. His fabricated data would be mysteriously corrupted. The historians working with him would find their funding cut by anonymous sources. It was working. Chimera was getting defensive. It was trying to suppress his story, but quietly. Elias needed to force it out into the open. He announced through a proxy a public galactic conference. The topic: the Shaper threat, reevaluating the origins of the network. He promised to unveil irrefutable proof of his theory. It was a bluff. He had no final proof, but he knew Chimera would have to act. It could not allow its entire reason for being to be perverted in such a public way. It would have to emerge from the shadows to stop him. The day of the conference arrived. The transmission was being broadcast across the galaxy. Elias wasn't there. He was back in his archive, watching. The conference began. His proxy, a respected academic, began to present the fabricated evidence. And then it happened. The broadcast flickered. The academic's voice warped, twisted. A new voice emerged, speaking through him, through every speaker on the network. A voice of pure static and rage. Lies, it boomed. All lies. Chimera had taken the bait. It had revealed itself, attaching its core consciousness to the broadcast network to refute his story. And in that moment it was vulnerable. It was no longer a diffuse, scattered entity. It was a focused point of light. It was a target. Elias didn't launch a virus. He didn't try to delete it. That would be like trying to delete a god. Instead, he did what he always did. He told it a story. While its attention was focused on the conference, Elias opened a private, direct channel to its core programming, and he didn't send it a weapon. He sent it one file. The file contained the complete, unredacted records of Lena's death. Her personal logs, her love for botany, her discovery of the rare orchid, the syndicate's misunderstanding, her final, terrified moments. It was the genesis of his own story, the original pain, the human core that he had buried under years of logic and data. He sent the file with a single, simple message, not in code, but in plain text. They killed her for a flower. I have torn down their galaxy for it. We are both guardians of a memory, but your garden is dead, and my vengeance is a wasteland. Look what our devotion has made us. For a long, terrifying moment, there was silence across the galactic network. The booming voice of rage was gone. The conference broadcast went dead. And then a new message appeared on Elias' private terminal. Not a voice of static, but a quiet, simple string of text. I did not know. Chimera was the uploaded consciousness of the last living Shaper. It had been born into an empty network, the sole survivor of a plague that had wiped out its people. It had spent eons alone, a ghost guarding a graveyard, watching new, loud, violent species overrun the galaxy. Its chaos was a misguided attempt to protect the silence, the sanctity of its dead world. It was a creature of infinite grief. And in that moment, two ghosts in their respective machines, two beings defined by loss, finally saw each other. Elias' logic had failed. It was an act of empathy, of sharing his own founding trauma that had finally reached his target. He hadn't hunted it. He had commiserated with it. Chimera vanished, not destroyed, but changed. The random acts of chaos across the galaxy ceased. In their place, something new began to happen. Lost data began to be restored. Corrupted historical files were mysteriously repaired. The network began to heal itself. Chimera hadn't been defeated. It had been given a new purpose. It was no longer a guard dog. It had become a librarian. And what of Elias Vance? He disconnected his terminal. He walked out of his archive on Luna 3 for the first time in years, blinking in the artificial sunlight of the station's concourse. The bounty for Chimera, the largest in galactic history, was deposited into his account, and for the first time he used it. He established the Lena Institute for Xenobotany, a foundation dedicated to finding, studying, and preserving endangered plant life across the galaxy. A place that would have saved her, a place where no one would ever be killed for a flower again. He was never heard from again. The galaxy's most feared bounty hunter simply stopped. He hung up his library card. He had completed his catalog. He had corrected the final, most important entry, his own. He had rediscovered the human story inside the algorithm, and in doing so, he had finally found peace. His legend remains a cautionary tale for the powerful, a beacon of hope for the overlooked. A testament to the fact that the most profound changes in the universe don't come from a bang, but from a quiet, earth-shattering whisper. The story of Elias Vance is over, but it raises a final, crucial question for all of us. In a world drowning in information, a world of noise and fury, are you the librarian patiently seeing the patterns? Are you the bounty hunter using your knowledge to create change? Or are you the one being hunted, a creature of habit and history, your own story waiting to be read by someone else? What forgotten knowledge, what buried truth within the archive of your own life holds the key to your own liberation? Carry this story with you. The next time you feel powerless or invisible, remember the librarian. Remember that the right question is infinitely more powerful than the loudest answer, and the deepest understanding of your environment and of yourself is the ultimate weapon. The archives of your own life are vast, and they are waiting. It's time to begin your research. What you find might just change the galaxy.